Hello. All right, everyone. Welcome to our next session here. Franz and I are very, very excited to be here with Alex Dean, who is the co-founder and CEO of Snowplow. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here.
So let's dive right in. You wrote an amazing blog post here at the beginning of the year that was, well, really about why Martech is interesting again. So for everyone here, why is Martech interesting again?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. So I think it's an amazing point in the market, and it's a real inflection point in marketing technology. And we've been very involved in this at Snowplow for the last 10 years, and happy to kind of give more context on that in due course. But there's a lot of change in the air at the moment, and we saw some really big trends, and we've been a part of some big trends. To call a few of those out, the reimagining of Martech stacks around the data warehouse and the data lake house is big. AI is just getting bigger and bigger, generative AI. And topics like that, there's a lot of change. There's a lot of excitement in the market again.
Yeah, I remember when I was reading that post for the data warehouse, you had this photo of a series of dominoes, larger and larger dominoes knocking each other down. And I think the caption for it was something like, okay, that first domino was the release of Amazon Redshift. Sort of go into that, what made that the first domino?
Yeah, so I think for us, that really was the first domino. So we started Snowplow in 2012, really with the objective of helping companies, helping brands to generate their own kind of web behavioral data, web analytics style data, and get it into their own Amazon account. And back then we were storing the data in S3, and Redshift hadn't even come out yet. And when Redshift came out, a year after we started Snowplow, we saw this real kind of inflection point. And I think for me, the cloud data warehouses, starting with Redshift, they changed the economics of brands being able to store all this, very rich consumer behavioral data, first-party data themselves. And it's taken, like all technology trends, it starts really fast and then it takes time for the market to move. And now you see, Snowflake, Databricks, BigQuery. It's a huge trend now, brands owning their own data.
Yeah, no, it's showing up all throughout today's event here. This real convergence around cloud data warehouses. So I guess maybe let's dig a little bit into that for a moment. What are really the advantages from your perspective of MarTech apps converging on this more common data layer in the warehouse? What problems does that solve?
Yeah, I think it solves a few problems. I think one of the most important ones is the kind of split brain problem, where over the years marketers have been buying a bunch of different packages, and those packages have been doing kind of a shadow copy almost of some of the most sensitive data, the consumer data. And those marketers have then been, building algorithms, writing rules, creating segmentations in those specific silos, if you will. And I think what the data warehouses and lake houses are letting brands do now is just consolidate all of their first-party consumer behavioral data in the same place inside their own warehouse or lakehouse instance. And that just prevents a lot of the duplication, the split brain problems, the algorithms, the segments being different in different systems. I think that's a really big one. I think another really big trend is the toolkits that marketers are trying to apply to that data. They're getting more sophisticated, and they just want to kind of bring those algorithms to the data in that warehouse. And so, I think that the generative AI stuff is super interesting. And Scott, I know you've been writing a lot about it. If marketers have to wait for things like ChatGPT to be rolled out inside their kind of packaged tools, they're going to be waiting a while for that to get to full richness. Whereas if they can take things like ChatGPT and apply it to the data in Snowflake or Databricks, that's really powerful and will unlock some really cool use cases.
So there's a lot of upside to this. What challenges does it create for marketers? The shift. What are the things that they're going to need to either develop from a capability perspective, or things they should be watching out for? What's the hill that they're climbing?
What's the challenge? What's the challenge here? Yeah, I think you and I have spoken about this recently. I think that this kind of trend of composability and this trend of almost building your way to your own bespoke solutions on top of your own first-party customer data. I think that's a journey, and it's going to be, it's still got rough edges, right? Because we're figuring it out. We're figuring out what composable CDP means, what headless BI means, all these sorts of things. So we're still figuring a lot of stuff out. SIs are going to be involved, data teams are going to be involved. So it's, I don't want to trivialize the effort, but I do think the kind of composability direction is really valuable and will be really powerful. And I think we should probably all look at kind of the composable DX trend that you kind of switched me onto around, the Mac Alliance, and how personalization and digital experience is being sort of reimagined in a composable way. And the lessons that have been learned there, we should take those over to kind of composable Martech and composable CDP.
I would like to know if you talk about rolling out this. It's a new trend. It's a new way of setting up your stack, and we're doing a lot of research in how stacks are composed. In the old days, big enterprise, more and more best of breed, and now it's really down to composable elements. What skill is required? What do you see? If we talk to clients, we see that clients often lack data architecture qualities or skills. So what is the biggest skill you would recommend people to hire or to train?
Oh, Franz, I think that's a good question. I actually think we need translators, which is a kind of a funny thing to say, but I think there's such good thinking going on the marketing side around these composable experiences, and there's such good thinking coming up in these data teams that have been formed in the last few years, and these kind of more sophisticated data engineering, data platform, data science teams, and they've been doing a lot of great work building these strategic data assets on top of warehouse and lakehouse. But there's a real missing translation layer between those two sets of folk. And each side wants the other side's help, right? Like the marketing folk want more like data architecture experience to kind of compose these new approaches, and the data teams want to connect into business value. They've done loads of good work on like foundational data quality and ingest and stuff. Now they want to like connect the great data, the great like first party data they've been putting into warehouses. They want to connect that up to like exciting, business use cases like marketing use cases. So I think both sides want each other. They just need help like translating between the two sides.
The original role of marketing technologists back in the day were those translators between marketing and IT, and we've come full circle, but at a much more sophisticated level.
That's a great way of putting it.
As folks are getting more and more access to this just incredible wealth of data throughout their organization, that for most marketers, just either wasn't accessible to them or didn't have the tools to really be able to take advantage of that. I think this fits into like the second trend that you had in your post, which I'll start out by saying you actually compared third-party data to artificial trans fat. Okay, so tell us what's happening in ad tech and what's going on with these artificial trans fats.
I tried to make the first post on the new Substack. I tried to make it quite spicy, and I was looking for an analogy of something that was very mainstream and kind of pretty accepted, and suddenly went out of favor really fast. And that for me is what's happening with the third-party data. So to back up a bit, my co-founder Yali and I, we met at an ad tech business, OpenX, back in 2007. That's where we learned how to build these kind of clickstream pipelines that then turned into Snowplow's kind of consumer behavioral pipeline. So we kind of have been around the ad tech space for some time, and there've been ad tech users of Snowplow over the years as well. I think the big change is the whole market, and you could look at GDPR, you could look at national regulators in Europe and Australia and Brazil and states in the US, the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, et cetera. Like the whole market is really averse now to third-party data, and that's just changed very quickly. And a lot of the kind of default technology stacks around cookies that the marketers have relied on for the last 15 years, those are just kind of unbundling really fast now. And we're having some really interesting conversations now with snowplow customers who've made that investment in the first party data in their warehouse or their lakehouse. We're having really interesting conversations now around how do they kind of safely use that data to drive marketing. And we're looking at lookalike audiences, we're looking at data clean rooms. So I think the whole market is just changing really quickly now with that kind of trans fatty issue, as I coined it.
So what are the most interesting things you now see brands doing with first party data as the alternative? I'd imagine there's a lot of discovery happening there.
Yeah, I think there's we see both. So we see brands kind of reinventing and reimagining the core workloads like marketing attribution, digital analytics, customer engagement. But then we see them doing really interesting things. So the retail media networks on top of clean rooms is super interesting. Very rich dynamic personalization, in-stream, things like that. So I think there's a certain kind of hill, you called it, to get to composability. But once you're there, you're kind of much more unlocked. You can do things that are much more bespoke to your business model, your customers and consumers than you could in those kind of historic packaged environments.
I mean, that seems like one of the things that's also you mentioned the data clean rooms, and there seems to be a lot of varieties of these where, there's our own first party data and how we might directly leverage that. So great to leverage, have so much of it now accessible to us through the warehouse. But increasingly these different varieties of, I guess, what you'd call second party data, where it is a much more controlled exchange of data, whether it's with a particular, network in its own space, or perhaps even other companies inside your ecosystem. Like, how do you see marketers, how are they evolving along and getting their heads around what's really possible with second party data?
Yeah, I think that's going to be a big trend. And I think it's interesting how that's evolved. So there was a second party ecosystem through ad tech, through enrichment of data in the client side environments. Historically at Snowplow, we've always done enrichment of the behavioral data stream as it's come through our pipeline, and done things like geographic lookups and referrer analysis and stuff like that. But I think to your point, with kind of the data sharing capabilities in the new warehouses and the clean room vendors, it's going to be very interesting seeing how brands take their very rich first party behavioral profiles and augment them with probably second party data that they didn't even think of using a few years ago. And I think that's what's driving the media networks as well, that idea of almost layering different people that have different views of the same consumer on top of each other.
Do you see common denominators in how marketers use this data, what they stumble upon, like Scott said, something they run into and go like, hey, I didn't know that this type of data or data point was really important. And I don't know if you're able to say something about what you see across your clients, because many marketers listening now, I think, are interested in, what do others do? And, what stands out, and what type of, is it just, transactional data, or indeed location or weather, or enlighten us, please.
Yeah, Franz, that's a really good topic to dig into. I think that what do we see? We see marketers. I think everyone got stuck on the kind of customer golden record and the transactional and the demographic information in that. And I think what we see marketers doing now is realizing there's much richer consumer behavioral data out there. And Snowplow is a strong vendor of that data. And I think for different types of company, it'll be different, right? For some, it'll be how far through videos you watch. For some, it'll be like how far down a page do you scroll, what do you add to your cart. So it varies a lot based on the industry. But that kind of very nuanced behavioral signal is really valuable. And it hasn't been the norm in a lot of the kind of packaged environments. We found it out kind of through our own customer base when we were sort of asking them. So we were asking them every 6 months how involved they were getting in AI and machine learning. and it suddenly turned like about 18 months ago, and suddenly they were using our data in these machine learning models, and they were telling us that some of that kind of on-site or in-app behavior, they were very predictive features of someone was about to convert, or they're about to churn, or they're about to make a purchase. So I think brands should be very aware of, for example, the second-party data enrichment they can do, but the first-party consumer behavior is incredibly valuable.
Well, that actually leads us to the third topic from your blog post, which you were prescient here and thinking like, okay, this is going to be a major topic for 2023. It's perhaps become even more major more quickly than certainly I even expected. But that is AI. So much here. I guess first, let me just ask, what do you think it'll change the most in Martech, at least on this immediate horizon?
Scott, I wish I knew the answer to that. I think it's gonna impact. I think it's gonna make a lot of customer experiences, digital experiences, seem pretty primitive pretty quickly, because you only need certain brands or certain vendors even to really embrace generative and really start doing heavy like one-on-one personalization, and it just makes the old kind of rules-based systems look very, very primitive. So I think that's going to be quite disruptive. I think it's going to have lots of implications on the back office as well, in terms of ad trafficking, data analytics, attribution models. I think that it's going to have loads of implications there, but I think the consumer-facing stuff will be the stuff that's felt the strongest, fastest.
Yeah, I can definitely.
What do you think, Scott?
Well, yeah, I'm with you on even predicting it is a bit of a challenge. But I think the one thing we can probably agree on is it's going to change. Exactly how it changes, at what speed in different areas. Yes, was the Yogi Berra thing, predictions are hard, especially about the future. Or maybe that was a physicist who said that. But anyway, so I guess maybe this brings us back to this idea of like, okay, so for marketers, we're talking like, these major companies that are really ahead of the curve with this are going to shift the field of customer expectations and what should be possible in digital experiences. So everyone else is going to be like rushing to catch up, rushing to understand this. I guess I imagine a part of the role you play with your customers is not just providing them this great technology, but perhaps even providing, I don't know, a bit of therapy or like support for like, hey, listen, there's a lot of change, here we can like help you through this. Any advice on like what marketers can do to keep up in this environment where things are just changing so rapidly?
Yeah, I think it's a challenge, but I think it's a huge opportunity. And so you're right. I think in this place we operate in at Snowplow, and Snowplow, we operate in the intersection of kind of the modern data stack, the modern data workloads and vendors, and this kind of Martech, digital experience, data-driven marketing world. And I think my advice is just to be really curious and to bring people into organizations that can do that kind of dragoman, that translation role as well. I think there's a lot of people from the ad tech world who are out there building networks and browser-based data insights and personalization experiences. And those people are now moving and gravitating into the kind of warehouse or lakehouse first world. And they have incredible knowledge about how all these pieces can fit together and how we can compose them together as brands and vendors supporting brands. So, there's a lot of talent being shaken loose from the third party world, if you will. And we need those people to help us kind of build these new experiences and insights.
Well, I know we're almost out of time, but I'm wondering, if you were to step back, and again, hard to predict where things are going, but just, more of like, not so much prediction, What are your thoughts? Like, what are some of the things that you're most interested in paying attention to over this next couple of years for changes and what new opportunities may be? Or I guess the other side of that coin is like, are there like concerns or risks that you're like, yeah, I'd keep an eye on this?
I think there's a few pieces. I think that the continuing migration of talent and approaches and experiences from third party to first party, and that links into clean rooms, it links into like lookalike audiences and things like that. I think that's an important one. I think that I'm very interested in a couple of convergences. So I think it'll be very interesting to see how the kind of composable DX world, the kind of the great work that people like the Mac Alliance have been doing. I'm interested to see how that kind of joins up and connects with the kind of composable work that's going on with these sort of data infrastructures for marketers. So I think that's super interesting. And the third one I'm very interested in is what happens between the kind of measurement and attribution world and the actual kind of engagement world. So at the moment, those are fairly separate tracks, and there's a lot of manual work in between them to sort of understand performance of campaigns and things like that. But as it all converges on the warehouse or the lake house, and as these AIs get smarter, I think it'll be very interesting to see kind of almost like machine-driven campaigns, and they're self-learning, they're self-correcting. It'll take out a lot of the kind of manual error-prone work and the kind of the bias and opinion on it. I think that's a fair way off, but I think that's almost the convergence of the sort of the poacher and the gamekeeper sides of marketing, the player and the referee, and having these more sophisticated algorithms in the middle that are self-learning. I think that would be very cool.
Awesome. Well, Alex, thank you so much for joining us for this chat. My mind is still sort of reeling from everything we've covered here. As you said, yes, Martech is definitely interesting again.
It's interesting again.
So thank you for your time. Thank you also for sponsoring the Best of Breed Marketing Summit. Franz and I both really appreciate it.
Big thanks, Scott. Big thanks, Franz. And yeah, we've been delighted to be a part of the summit.
Thank you so much.